Welcome back, Visions fans. Ready Player Will here. This is the Kefka character review on the heels of the Final Fantasy VI collaboration rerun, much sooner, obviously, than we expected, but a lot of people are hyped for this character, and for good reasons, so let's get into why. Now today, pretty standard stuff, the character overview, base and total stat analysis, a couple other metrics here, all leading up to the report card where those stats will come in to contextualize with parts about his kit that you should know about, where we then segue into the class and job overview to look at those abilities a little bit closer, the limit break, dream, and mastery ability to kind of show some of those external stats, the TMR review, and then finally the general thoughts, which should sum up everything we've covered so far, hopefully being the final justification for my final grade thoughts. And then finishing off with job-based vision card eligibility, some Esper synergies and weapon optimization, just from a general recommendation perspective. Now, the character overview, brand new fire unit added to the game, obviously many of these as of late. They've given him the unique main job of Mad Mage, with Arithmetician and Energist as the subjobs. He does equip gloves with hats, cloths, and accessories with a move of 3, jump of 1 as another 100 cost unit. Now, from a weapon type resistance perspective, a lot of double digits here. This is obviously the trend with some of these newer units. Strongest at 20% to missile, 15% to magic, 10% to slash. He's at 0% to strike and the minus 10% to pierce. So that pierce damage is really the big one to really look out for. Now, he's most definitely a 97 faith unit, so you should be cognizant of what status ailments it can be afflicted by or not afflicted by. He's got 50% resistance to sleep and to stop, and 10% to stun. Overall, not the worst ones, not the best ones. Probably could be a little bit better, but I do think the stop one is kind of nice. The sleep one you don't really see as prevalently. And stun, although a lot of characters have it, you just don't see it used often. Now, from the base stat perspective, HP-wise does skew a little bit on the lower side, but he does end up making up for it as we go through his kit. Not terribly surprising. A lot of mages do tend to skew on the lower side from a base HP perspective. From a base magic perspective, he is up there amongst many of the others. Magic stat is most definitely not a problem that he has. On the other hand, though, the agility, only at 52 base agility, very, very low. But again, that's not the end of the story. They've done some really creative things with this kit here, which is why you should understand the base stats and then what passives do and then what external gear does, because the story drastically changes from start to finish. Now, the dexterity side of things very low as well, and luck a little bit below average here as well. So as we transition these 5 charts into more of like a relative consolidated one, looking at his relative strengths compared to other UR units, it doesn't look that good starting off. Not the end of the story. The magic stat obviously is the shining star here, but once we add in some of the board nodes, the mastery stats, things of that nature, things change even more significantly. Still not great overall. The magic stat definitely takes a dip, but again, very misleading for where he ends up. And just talking a little bit as to why. Number one, from a board stat perspective, they give him a very low amount of magic here, only at 63. Most units get way more than that, but what they opted to do instead is give him an above average amount of HP. Now, 250 isn't necessarily a lot, but things will add up over time, as we'll see. Now, another thing they did was this board node that gives a percentage increase to a stat. Most damage dealers get their preferred stat upgraded. So in this instance, most mages get a magic bump here as well. They did not with Kefka. They gave him an HP node again. So kind of trying to bulk him up just a smidge on the HP side of things, despite the fact that his base HP obviously is on the lower side of things, which is why that magic stat ends up taking a total dip. But there's a massive, massive asterisk to all of this, which is his Energist passive Hyper Vitality, which you're going to have on near 100% of the time, at least in PvP. This is an agility of 30%, magic of 60%, and dexterity of 60% for 5 turns. So yes, while he does start off on the relatively low side of things for total stats, that passive will significantly change the story, as we'll see in just a second. And on that note of agility, if you recall his base agility, only at 52, they do give him a little bit extra here at 9, that's just slightly above the average. But if you look at what he has with passives and without passives, this blue line is without passives, very, very slow. Sub 75 here for agility, but you equip that 30% agility passive, he is near top of the chart. So drastically alters the statistical complexion of this character. Now, again, that's only limited to 5 turns, but that's a obviously very noteworthy change here. Now we look at the crit hit and crit avoid, kind of the same thing here. Now my innate critical hit rate, I don't normally include passives in these calculations, but because you're going to have it on 100% of the time, I don't want to mislead his critical hit rate either. That 60% dexterity buff does give him a sizable amount of critical hit rate here. And he's got a fair amount of the critical hit rate nodes as well. So although that dexterity stat innately is pretty low, they come up with some creative ways externally to actually get him relatively above average here. And the crit avoidance scaling off the luck is basically average, neither strong nor weak. Now we get into the accuracy. Again, without passives, he is very average when it comes to accuracy. And in this game, average is basically bad. It's not really bad, but But to hit top tier evade, you need to be a little bit better than just average. That 60% dexterity does give him roughly 15% dexterity or so, give or take. So it's a little bit of buff, but overall on this green line, when you're comparing him to other characters with their passives, he is definitely a relatively inaccurate unit. Not that he's less than average, but he's basically at the average. Now for evasion, not an evade unit at all. I know fire units have tended to skew that way a little bit, but obviously we're getting back to normal with Roy and Hyo, and now obviously with Kefka as well. Which leads us finally to the report card. Now from an effective HP perspective, I'm going with a C+ overall. Which again, you may not expect given that HP stat seeming relatively low to start with, but he does have 17 innate defense, 8 innate spirit, and 20 innate AoE resistance. And again, a lot of those double-digit resists do bump up his effective HP, even though the number itself is slightly lower. He is re-raise capable, and he does have a buff that applies an additional 20 AoE resistance and a 20 spirit resistance as well, and 8 AoE resistance on the weapon. So overall, a lot more bulky than that HP stat on the base stat would lead you to believe. I think he's basically about equal for physical and magic. Obviously depends on if it's pierce or not, and if there's spirit scaling / tax, that's obviously a different topic. But we get to the primary stat here. I'm going A+ here as one of the top in the game. His passive and his base magic, I'm sorry for the misprint, it says base HP. His base magic scale exceptionally well, can easily top 1900 magic. Obviously when you're putting in certain vision cards, primarily the glove-oriented vision cards, but even still, just general 50% magic ones will definitely get this very, very high. And after a re-raise, he gets an additional 60% magic. So even if you kill him and he re-raises, he's going to have amongst some of the highest magic in the game as an active stat. Now for agility, I am going with an A here because I am considering that passive to effectively be on for all the time, and 5 turns is more than enough in a battle that's the majority of your battle. He is near the top of the chart agility with that passive. It does obviously fall off after 5 turns, at which point he is exceptionally slow, but still very, very potent. Now accuracy, I'm going with a C here. Very average accuracy, no guaranteed hits. Totally fine, you gotta have a weakness somewhere in a character kit. Now evasion, also going with a D, not an evade unit, don't consider it. Movement, I am going with a B-. He does have a move and jump 1 on his passive. You just likely won't be using it given what the other 2 passives are. They are exceptionally good. But it is nice that they at least gave that to him for whatever PvE usage or who knows what creativity you can use with it. Which on that note, passives, I am going with an A+ here. He's got stellar main 2 passives with some flexibility on the other ones, which is certainly nice for PvE content or just being able to have options. At the end of the day, I value optionality in a character when you have a couple different ways to build them, because as maps change, as metas change, as game balance changes, you want characters to be able to kind of grow and evolve on their own. And if you have a character that's just like made for one specific thing and that's it, they don't always, plug and play very well in the rest of the game. But overall, A+ here. Counter, also going A+. He's got a physical reflex and kind of like a poison barb plus. That's that ninja counter ability that they've given uniquely to him. I don't love it, but it's not as bad as I think. And then overall kit, though, I am going with an A-. He is very buff heavy, though. His 2 buffs are exceptionally important. It's the biggest 2 pieces about him. Without those, things change pretty drastically. But other than that, a good thing for a final grade of an A-. Now, I don't think he's a top meta-defining unit, which I typically reserve these A grades for, but he's just so extremely strong. We're obviously seeing that post-3rd anniversary here. Most of these characters are top of the charts and do have some sustainability to stay that way for a while. He is also one of those units. Now, we get into the passive abilities. The Magitech Overload and the Hyper Vitality are the 2 that I think you'll permanently have on. Magic 24%, Spirit Pen of 40, and decrease attack times of 250 for the Magitech Overload. That's like almost a must. From the cast time alone, and Spirit Pen, it's almost a must. The Hyper Vitality, kind of the same thing. You saw how drastically that changes him. I obviously like the extra move or jump depending upon, I don't know, whatever map things get thrown at you. But overall, those 2 passives, 2 thumbs up. Now the counter abilities, I do think the Energist Hyper Reactivity is probably the best one I have on here. Reflex in general is obviously very strong survivability. That Poison Barb Plus ability that I mentioned is kind of his unique one, the Wee-hee-hee ability. It's basically an expanded range to use. I don't hate it, but 50% is certainly a nice proc counter chance. And Poison is kind of like a sneaky good amount of damage with the amount of resistances now in the game, that it's just like a flat, 20% damage taken to the unit. Overall, I like what he has for counter abilities. Now the main job buffs. This is where he carves his niche. Show Me Your Power is what is particularly special about him. It's the 20 Spirit and AoE resistance for he and his teammates, but it also gives 5 hate to those teammates that he buffs, which obviously is very strong. It bumps him down the priority list, and it can turn a non-tank into functionally a tank for 3 hits. He also uses re-raise after that, and upon actually re-raising, he'll get 200 CT and 60% magic buff for 3 turns. So again, both of these are very, very important for him to execute to really act at his maximum level. Now we're talking the main job offensive. There's 4 abilities here. Nice blend of 2 unit ones, 2 AoE ones, and even the AoE ones. You get a diamond one and a cross-shaped one. 2 of these have cast time and 2 of them don't. So again, there's some very good flexibility here for how his AI will work. His lowest AP ability is that 25 Spirit Imperil, range height of 1. The Light of Judgment is his slowest ability, cast time of 200, but very, very strong in that it's the 25% magic imperil, the largest diamond of his AoEs, and it's also a debuff of attack and magic 40% and the agility of 20%. Absolutely love this ability. You just need to be cognizant of that cast time. Hyperdrive is exceptionally good in that it is a typeless magic attack and that it'll bypass any kind of element resistance you have. It also reduces the counter chance of 100, also dispels re-raise, and is a 220% modifier, so obviously really, really like this. And I think sneaky good about it, it's a range height of 2, which you don't often see with some of those unit abilities, so like this a lot. One thing to also note is that this Light of Judgment ability with that giant diamond AoE is a range of 5 away. That is very important when you talk about characters that are buff heavy, that you need to know their maximum range to make sure they never get baited too early. 5 on the main job here is the furthest. And then Forsaken, this is another cross-shape AoE here. It will dispel haste to targets, but will also increase the modifier up to 225 if the enemy has haste, poison, blind, silence, or confusion. So there is some upside here in terms of little extra utility as an insta-cast ability. So overall, very strong and well-rounded main job offensively. Now the sub-job for Mad Mage, I actually like this one a lot too, believe it or not. I think Trine is a very underrated ability, and then it's another AoE. This is another range 5 ability. I like that it has 2 different status effects on it, which do potentially affect its survivability. That, if you can silence an enemy mage, they obviously can't cast spells, or if you blind an enemy physical damage dealer or even a magic dealer, they obviously will be likely missing you. So I like what this has to offer, and then even this, you're useless to me if you're going against an evade team and he has a 0% hit chance. This is like not the worst ability in the world, that it's a attack debuff of 40% and the inflict slow. A lot of different status effects to play with. The reason why I say I like this is because the Arithmetician subjob, while I do genuinely like very much for some of that curative potential for him, I think his buffs on the main job are so important that you often would not want him to be leaning into the curative potential. I don't think the Arithmetician heals are all that strong, and he does not have any healing power in the kit, so it's likely not going to necessarily change the breakpoint for some of your teammates. I do think that the height disable is certainly nice for those evade teams you might see, where if you can AoE disable a couple of evade units, they obviously lose all their evasion and be hit by Kefka in the next turn. But outside of that, the big thing that I don't like here is that level 3 Fyra is actually a range of 6. So that exceeds the range on his main job, which is why I don't like this. I would not have it turned it on, but I don't want him to get baited or to have to hit an enemy too far away. I don't think it's going to be a significant source of damage. So this is a very nice sub-job, but I actually don't think it's going to be as applicable as many other characters do when they have their Arithmetician. And there's a misprint here. This is the Energist subjob, not the Nightblade. I apologize. But the Energist subjob, I really think this is here just from a stat and a passive perspective. I don't actually like this subjob all that much. Certainly nice that, you know, he's got a barrier break, but this is only 2 squares away. I don't think you're ever going to really be using this as an ability. Now we get into the Limit Break, the Mastery, and the Dream. The Limit Break here is a giant diamond AoE, again 5 squares away. It's a confusion proc, and although I think confusion is nice from a like chaos perspective and throwing an X factor in the battle, it is easily dispellable when your teammate hits them next, so there you might not get any upside out of this, but certainly a nice thing to have against status effects can really change and alter the battles. Overall, a good limit break, I think. Now we look at the Mastery ability. He gets 10 magic attack resistance penetration here, and that's part of where his 10 AoE resistance comes from. He gets another 10 on the Dream ability, and that's where some of his defense comes from as well. 15 defense here. Now for the TMR review, I am actually not crazy about this TMR, but it's not the worst one. It's one of those ones that I'm glad they put in because there's nothing really like it in terms of the attributes per se. We do have obviously a ton of sources of agility 25% of the game, whether it's character buffs or other TMRs. This is just a nice one that has the magic buff on it as well. You like to see an accessory that has, 4 stats on them, and one of them is agility, but that 4 agility is a couple points less than some of the other leading agility TMRs, so this one's okay. I don't think you're going to use it quite often, though. Now, for my general thoughts, I think he has exceptional mage survivability. Upwards of 78 AoE resistance. Now, that is including some of the glove-based division cards, where one of them gives an extra 10. That's also including his buff, but you can get up to exceptionally high amounts of that. Now, his teammate hate buff also bumps him down the priority list, which is a form of survivability that you don't have to worry about him being the first or second target. He might be up to the third oriented target in any given battle. He does have enough EHP to not easily be one-shot, which is certainly important. He does have a physical reflex counter, which is part of their survivability, and re-raise. So he is not as flimsy as some of these other magic damage dealers might be. Now, really strong magic damage upside. He has 2 imperils, 25% each, huge magic stat potential, and that typeless single unit attack I really like in this phase of the game where there's way more element resistance than ever, there's way more AoE resistance than ever, so the ability to just have a unit-based typeless attack, kind of similar to the Winged Stern. I really like that upside to kind of cleave through a variety of different damage mitigations. Now, on the damage topic, I do think there's a slight penetration concern. Not really, but it's worth talking about. He does get 60 spear penetration with his passive and his weapon, which is good. I think it's probably good enough. You don't see a ton of like super high spirit characters like you do with the defense side of things. He does only get 20 magic resistance penetration though with his mastery ability and the trust. I know obviously the glove vision card, the Roy Mustang one, does change this, so you know, it changes the conversation, but I do think there's some potential concerns with the penetrations, despite the fact that his magic stack is very high. Then again, those imperils certainly help with the penetration conversation as well. Now, I love the status effect utility. He's got confusion on the limit break, silence and blind on the sub attack, technically slow and disable access too, so loads of status effects to lean into. He does have good extra utility as well with the typeless unit attack, with the re-raiser move. That main AoE ability has attack and magic down and agility down. He can AoE dispel haste on his, you know, fourth 120 ability there too, and that teammate hate and 20 AoE and spirit to them and himself is obviously huge as well, so loads of potential utility there. I do think the cast time is also a slight concern. Pragmatically, he tops out at 650. That's his passive, a Trust Stone passive, and an Esper. You can get to 800 with the vision card of his in the main slot. That means that the slowest ability will 1 tick. If you don't have that vision card on, it'll be 2 ticks, which is not the worst, but there's so many fast characters in the game that actually might be a slight demerit sometimes if you're not actually preparing for that. It does also limit him Esper-wise, which is why I think it's honorable mention that if you need to have that extra 200 cast time down, you're really sticking to Valfor or Siren as your Espers, which is obviously super limiting from a damage and survival perspective. And finally, I do think there's obviously significant statistic fall-off after 5 turns, but still obviously very potent. Now for the job-based vision cards, there is a lot here for the glove. The game has done a very good job in adding these glove-based vision cards, and there are some stats you'd like to see. 20 AoE resistance, 15% agility, there's a magic attack and magic attack res penetration. You have another one that has a human killer upon magic attack, which is coming in JP. I do think the ones to really emphasize are likely Silver Memories and A Fearsome Foe Appears. Those are really more the kind of bread and butter vision cards you like to put on your party, but they do have some huge magic damage upside ones as well, so there's a couple ones to play with. The biggest thing that I really like about all of these is that each one of them has a different type of potential weapon attack resistance. So you have magic res, you have pierce resistance, slash resistance, missile resistance, and then the future strike resistance. So there's a couple different ways that you can lean into some weapon type resistances here, which I think is obviously kind of creative. Now from an Esper synergy perspective, I think obviously focus magic attack mainly because you want that typeless attack to still get magic attack modifiers. Human killer second for the same logic. Fire attack being third, where obviously fire attack only applies to like 3 out of those 4 main job abilities. After that, accuracy certainly can't hurt. And then the rest is matchup specific. So Bahamut is obviously like the magic damage dealing #1, but I do think pragmatically speaking, Valfor or Siren are your likely go-tos. I think these next 3 are honorable mentions. I think Typhon's probably my favorite out of these 3, but Shiva has that pierce resistance, which is his negative. It's also got accuracy, and Ramu has strike resistance, which in this meta is very popular. He also has that accuracy. So these are my 3 big like accuracy espers. Finally, I do think Dark Ramu obviously has some big damage upside as well. Bloody Moon is kind of nice that it's got that spirit and accuracy as well. And I do think the Mind Flayer is an honorable mention MR esper, but that's really more for limited stuff. Realistically speaking, I think I'm recommending these 3 as my ones to go with. I really just like Typhon because of that magic percent bump as well as the accuracy, but I really like the cast time down of Valfor and Siren. And then finally, the weapon optimization. I really think it's just Kefka's gloves. There's too much here to offer to him that I don't think any of the other ones really get any kind of advantage. I obviously think the 20 spear penetration is nice. That's really important for overall penetration. The magic attack 15 and human killer 10, obviously certain nice as well, but it's really the AoE resistance of 8 that I think is fairly significant here. That, yeah, you can get kind of close on the mods and the penetrations with some other weapons, but you can't get all of them like this in one place. And again, just for honorable mention, there is a glove TMR that if you want to min-max your magic this way, this one also technically has a spirit penetration, so not a massive fall off from that perspective, but his weapon is definitely the best. But that's the Kefka review in a nutshell. Obviously a really fun character to theory craft with. I do think he's a strong addition to the glove units, obviously, where there's been a lot of emphasis on them. He pairs exceptionally well with Roy and even Fire in general. Fire's in a very good spot at the moment. You could obviously go with Wind as well with some of their overlap with Dark Tetrasylphid, but I'm really looking forward to seeing his influence in the game in the long run. But that's it for now. Thanks for watching, everybody, and I'll talk to you all soon.